It's the most storied country club in Western New York, and it's got a history going back to the early 1900s, as well as a dramatic history involving the Professional Golfers Association. What is it? And who knows the most about it? We'll be talking to that person in a moment on this week's edition of the Greater Western New York Report, which, as always, is brought to you by...
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard.
The Linden Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Well, hi there, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm Chris Carosa. With me this week is Fred Beltz. He is the historian of Oak Hill Country Club. Yes, you probably heard of that. It seems to have been making some national news recently, as it has done in the past. Speaking of the past, Fred, you're the historian of Oak Hill Country Club. How did you end up being the historian? How does one get to be the historian of a country club?
I always joke that I was the only person who stood up and said they wanted the job. That was in 2005, 20 years ago. But, I had been a collector of antique golf memorabilia for a long time. And when my predecessor retired, I took over the job.
So tell us a little bit about the history of the country club. When did it start and who started it?
Yeah, the club was formed in the fall of 1901. There were approximately 25 business and professional individuals. Oak Hill's not the oldest course in the Rochester area. That's the country club of Rochester. But these 25 individuals decided that they wanted their own club and went about the process of leasing 90 acres of land along the Genesee River and formed Oak Hill, which is going on 125 years old now.
So in the beginning, it wasn't located where it was located now, where it is located now. In fact, we had a question, is what prompted the golf course to move and how long did it take to relocate to its current location?
Sure. So no, originally the club was located along the Genesee River in the property that is now occupied by the University of Rochester. The feeling was that that the university needed to expand. They wanted to add a medical and dental school. And so a land swap occurred where the 90 acres and a very nice but small clubhouse along the river was exchanged for 355 acres in Pittsford, 2 Donald Ross courses, and a very commodious Tudor clubhouse. I think of this as probably the greatest land swap in the history of Western New York.
Now we have some photos that you sent to us that sort of showed the country club, what it looked like a while back. Can you tell us what's in this particular picture here?
Yeah, so this is the original clubhouse. You can see the river off to the left just a little bit. It was an old farmhouse. It was fairly rudimentary. Kerosene lamps, no hot water. You changed your clothes in the barn on the right-hand side of that picture. The rules were pretty rudimentary: no cursing, no gambling, and no smoking cigars in the dining room. It took the initiation was $25, and the dues were $20 a year plus $5 for each additional family member that was part of the club. Then, and we could switch to the next picture. Then in 1911, the club was quite successful and had grown to well over 150 members. And so they built a much more expansive clubhouse, a dining room that could seat 450 and 18 guest rooms. And that's where they happily resided. You can see tennis courts in the foreground. They would boat on the river and play golf. And that's where the club existed up until the early 1920s, which is when the land swap occurred. Oak Hill moved into its new, and here you can see an aerial view along the river, and you can see the bunkers, and off on the right, about halfway up, you see the 4 tennis courts and the clubhouse. So this is where the university is today. Then in 1922, the land swap occurred, and it took a couple years for it all to come together and for the new courses to be built. And we can switch to the next picture. And here you see the clubhouse as it looked in 1930. Although there are beautiful elm trees off on the right hand, it was mostly barren, farmed out land. But that would change over the years with the planting of thousands and thousands of oak seedlings. This is still the clubhouse today, although it has a number of additions. The big porches are now enclosed. We have air conditioning. And in the foreground is now where the 8 bowling alleys are. You can see the large. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, we did have a question from someone who wanted to know what prompted this move. We know that the U of R wanted the land, but how was the U of R in a position to make this land swap? What did they have? Did they get a lot of money from somebody, or?
George Eastman was very much in the background. And they needed to raise about $10 million to do the deal. And Eastman ceded the need. But there were, once George Eastman took up a project, the community got very much behind it. Believe it or not, some Oak Hill members weren't sure they wanted to move. But in the final analysis, everyone agreed it was for the good of the city and the city's future. So that's how that came about.
Were there members of Oak Hill who were already part of the process, either affiliated with Kodak or with the University of Rochester? Did they help facilitate this land swap?
I don't know of specific situations, but it wouldn't surprise me a bit. I mean, at one point in time, who wasn't part of Eastman Kodak or the University of Rochester? And the Oak Hill membership was for many, many years, had representation from both entities. Yep.
Let's move to the next picture. Who are these people in the picture?
So almost immediately, the public realized that the East course, East and the West, but especially the East, was a very, very special place and a special golf course. And so, although the move was in 1926, as recent as 1930, Oak Hill hosted the inaugural Women's New York State Amateur Championship. On the left is Maureen Orcott, and on the right is Helen Hicks. Helen Hicks was a great amateur golfer, New York Times columnist, and Maureen Orcott would go on to become one of the first women professional golfers, one of the original 13 forming the LPGA. Helen Hicks won, and And Oak Hill donated the cup, which is still known as the Oak Hill Cup.
Well, we had a question, another one that came in terms of the course design. Let's go back to what you were saying. The course
Sure.
was initially, let's go back to this photo here. So the course was originally designed, there you go, by Genesee River. And then was it redesigned when it moved, or did you kind of duplicate it when it was moved to Pittsford?
Yeah, no, there's really no records who designed this course, the original course in 1901. There is some evidence that Donald Ross had input in 1911 when the second 9 holes were added. But no, it was a totally different design. The Oak Hill brought Donald Ross in to walk the property prior to agreeing to the move, and Ross, agreed that it would be an ideal place. There's a lot of terrain change, elevation changes, and the terrain and the Allens Creek, which runs through the property, made it very attractive for a golf course.
Going back to the picture of Orcutt and Hicks,
yeah.
This precipitated really the LPGA. Was there and for a number of years, the LPGA had an annual tournament in Rochester. Was that annual tournament a sort of like an offshoot of this original introduction of women's golf at Oak Hill?
Not really. This was an amateur championship, the New York State Amateur Championship, whereas the LPGA is the ladies' professional golf association, and those two are kept quite separate. It just happened that at the time, both of these ladies were amateurs, although Maureen Orcutt would go on to become one of the founding members of the LPGA.
Now let's turn to another name that people are probably more familiar with, although you can't really see him in the picture here. What's this a picture of?
This is a picture of the 13th green in 1934. 1934, Oak Hill hosted the Walter Hagen Centennial Tournament. It was Walter Hagen's 20th anniversary of his first U.S. Open win in Midlothian Country Club, and it was the centennial of Rochester's incorporation. You're right. It's kind of tough to see Walter Hagen, but he's there. He's the fellow putting in the middle of the green. What was significant about this is that this was Walter Hagen's tournament, and he invited all his friends to come and play. Well, who were his friends at the time? They were the greatest golfers in the world. And so this was the initial or the first time that the great golfers of the world in that era got to see the East Course. And very candidly, everybody loved it. Yeah. And
then we have this.
Yeah, so now let's move forward a few more years. Frank Gannett from Gannett News, now USA Today, was a member at Oak Hill and publisher of the Times Union. And so in 1941, Oak Hill hosted the Times Union Open. Some folks will remember that as the afternoon paper. And the gentleman on your right is Sam Snead. He won the tournament. The gentleman reaching over Gannett's shoulder, trying to grab the check, is Ben Hogan, who came in second. And on the left is Wood. This really gave the club a taste of hosting yet another tournament. And then in the following year, 1942, the tournament was almost postponed because of World War II, but they went ahead with it anyway. And Ben Hogan, the gentleman reaching for the check, wouldn't have to reach over anybody's shoulder that year because he won it outright. In fact, in the first round, he shot a 64, which was the course record. and that record stood. It was matched by Curtis Strange in 1989, but that record was not broken until 2013 when Jason Duffner shot a 63. And if you think about it, there are not a lot of sports records that last for 71 years, but that's how long that record lasted. And again, everybody's really excited. The membership enjoys having these tournaments. The community enjoys having these tournaments. And but there was also a world war going on, so there was a pause then for a number of years until the war was over. We can jump. Yeah, and so here we are in 1947. Oak Hill hosted a couple of fundraisers for European relief, war bonds, and that sort of thing. I always like this picture because, in my opinion, this is the greatest foursome that ever walked Oak Hill's property. Now, some people might disagree, but on your left you have Ben Hogan. Next to him is Byron Nelson, then Sam Snead, and then Jimmy DeMeritt. Amongst these four men, there were 254 tour championship wins, which is incredible, plus 24 major tournament wins. So each one of these gentlemen is in the Golf Hall of Fame. And yep.
Okay, so let's take a break here. And when we come back, we're going to explore a little bit more about the relationship between Oak Hill and the PGA. That's a very significant and storied relationship also that brings national coverage here to Western New York, as we saw over the past weekend. And with that, let's go to our break, and we'll be right back.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Okay, we're back. Welcome everyone again to the Great State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm Chris Carosa. Our guest this week is Fred Beltz. He is the historian of Oak Hill Country Club. And Fred, tell us a little bit about what happened over the past few weeks. Not only maybe to the country club, but how about you? You probably got a lot more attention paid to you in your role as historian. What did it feel like? Who did you talk to, and what kind of memories do you have of this past week or so?
Well, it was really exciting, but it was also a whole lot of work for I would say, at least 3 weeks prior, and some even earlier than that. We were getting 2, 3, sometimes 4 media inquiries every day. We were doing, I wrote a number of articles on golf, Oak Hill's history, in multiple interviews. I like to say Golf Week, Golf Digest, the Golf Heritage Society. I mean, just to name a few, plus CBS, ESPN, SiriusXM. It was nonstop for us. And it's a lot of fun. Luckily, it only happens at that level about once a decade. And I had been through it before in 2013, so I knew what was coming. But the magnitude was just of this tournament was just enormous. I mean, there were just the build up. The merchandise tent was 60,000 square feet, and then there were all sorts of other build out. So it was exciting. It was very exciting.
Well, let's get back to the history portion of today's show. And although I would say that that's probably going to be history anyway, when you think about it. But let's go back and bring up this picture that you gave and explain who's on this picture and what this event marks.
Sure. So in 1949, now remember we had the Hagen Centennial and then the 41-42 Times Union, and then obviously the pause for World War II. This was, on the left is Charlie Coe, and on the right is Dr. Williams, the gentleman responsible for planting the thousands and thousands of trees on Oak Hill. And this was significant in a couple of ways. Charlie Coe won the 1949 amateur, and today the United States amateur, is still a very significant tournament. But at that point in time, in 1949, the amateur was still considered a major tournament. So today we think of the British Open, the U.S. Open, the Masters, and the PGA. Back then it was the British Open, the U.S. Open, the British Amateur, and the United States Amateur. Those were the four majors. So this was the first major tournament Oak Hill ever hosted, won by Charlie Coe, a great, great amateur. It's not a household name today, but he was six-time low amateur at the Masters. He won low amateur in the Masters in four different decades, the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, which is just an outstanding. In my mind, there's Bobby Jones and then Charlie Coe. So this was our inaugural major tournament. Then 7 years later, the PGA came back. We can jump to the next one. Not the PGA, the United States Golf Association came back, and we hosted the 1956 U.S. Open. And here we have Dr. Middlecoff. He's just made a slippery little 5-foot downhill putt for par on the 18th hole. Meanwhile, Ben Hogan, one hole back, missed a 30-inch putt, and so there was not a playoff. Middlecoff won outright. Then there was about a 12-year break until 1968, where Lee Trevino won the U.S. Open. Trevino was the first U.S. Open winner to have all four rounds in the 60s, and that had never happened before. That, combined with the loss of some of the Dutch elm trees to Dutch elm disease, led some to question whether or not Oak Hill was of U.S. Open caliber anymore. And we asked for another U.S. Open to be held in the late 70s. Our offer was not accepted. And this was a great concern to a number of the Oak Hill leadership. So they brought in golf architects Tom and George Fazio to solve a few choke points on the course, but mostly to just muscle up the course a little bit and put it in U.S. Open caliber quality again. And we can jump ahead to the next picture. Yeah, and so here you have we didn't get the U.S. Open in the late 70s, but we did get the 1980 PGA Championship. And at the end of the tournament, Jack Nicklaus, who you see here with the trophy, was the only player under par. He was 6 under. The next closest was 1 over. So out of a field of the greatest players in the world, only one could finish under par, and the whole question of whether or not Oak Hill was of U.S. Open or PGA quality went out the window. And this is significant because from 1980 forward, Oak Hill will host a major tournament, a significant tournament, almost every 5 years. So in 1984, there was the Senior U.S. Open that was won by Miller Barber when on the 15th hole of the last round, Arnold Palmer whiffed a putt, called the penalty on himself, and Barber won. Then in 1989, we can jump ahead. In 1989, Curtis Strange would win. He also tied in the third round. He tied the 64 that Ben Hogan had shot in 1942. This is a picture of 4 players. There was a number of remarkable events in the 89 Open, but probably the most memorable was that these 4 players on the same hole within 2 hours on the same day each had a hole-in-one. And that was extraordinary when you consider that previously there had only been 17 U.S. Holes-in-one in all U.S. Open history. The 4 golf balls are in the USGA Museum in Far Hills, New York. We have a couple of the 7-irons. They all use 7-irons, 167 yards. The hole was in the front lobe, and when setting the pins, the 2 gentlemen responsible said to each other, "That might be a hole-in-one spot," to which the other said, "Maybe more than one," and boy, were they right. So that was in 1989. Then 6 years later, we hosted the Ryder Cup. We can jump to the next picture, and here you see the European Ryder Cup team celebrating their victory. It was hard to watch because we all wanted to win very desperately, or the U.S. to win. But in the grander scheme of things, it was a good thing because it re-energized the Ryder Cup as a tournament. The U.S. had been winning it pretty regularly, so it was a positive in that respect. Then 4 years later, we hosted the U.S. Amateur. That was won by Hank Keeney. And then 5 years after that, we hosted the 2003 PGA Championship, our second PGA. And here you see Sean McKeel on the 72nd hole looking down at his shot that ended 2 inches from the hole. He hit a 7-iron from 175 yards out on the left side of the fairway. There's a little plaque there where he shot from. And when I have guests, I encourage them to take a 7-iron, see if they can get it as close to the hole. So far, nobody has. So that was our second PGA Championship. Then in 2008, we hosted the Senior PGA Championship, and that was won by Jay Haas. And with that win, or with that tournament, the Senior PGA, Oak Hill became the first and only course to host all 6 men's tournaments that rotate. Those would be the U.S. Open, the U.S. Senior Open, and the United States Amateur. And from the PGA side, it's the PGA Championship, the Senior PGA Championship, and the Ryder Cup. And Oak Hill is still the only club in the country to host all 6 of those very, very significant tournaments. We can jump now to the next picture. And here we have Jason Duffner, 2013. Duffner set a new course record of 63, and in the process won the Wanamaker Trophy, which you see him holding there. And that was our third PGA Championship. Then in 2019, we hosted a second senior PGA championship won by Ken Tanagawa, a gentleman who had played some early professional golf, then got his amateur status back. And then, just as luck would have it, the qualifying school for a PGA card was near his home. He went, he qualified, was Rookie of the Year in 2018, and then won the Senior PGA in 2019. And so that's our, then just last week, we can jump ahead again. Yeah, then just last week, we hosted our fourth PGA championship. Only Southern Hills, which has hosted 5 PGAs, has hosted more than Oak Hill has. It's no secret to anybody that it was won by Brooks Koepka, now a 5-time major champion and his 3rd PGA. He's only the 2nd individual in the modern stroke play era to have won 3 PGAs. The other 2, you might recognize the names of Jack Nicklaus and Tiger Woods. Some would argue that there were really 2 winners of the PGA, the other being Michael Block, who just captivated the world. This gentleman is in his mid-40s and just a marvelous individual. And then, looking forward, we're hosting the 2027 U.S. Amateur again. That'll be our 3rd U.S. Amateur. So there you have sort of Oak Hill's history in a nutshell.
All right. Well, Fred, thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone who is watching today's show. Thank the people who gave me questions in advance to ask Fred. They were really good questions, and I'm sure you folks have more. Fred, if people had questions about the history of Oak Hill, who do they call? Do they just call Oak Hill? Do they call you? How's that done?
They could email historian@oakhillcc.com.
Ah, great. Well, if you want to be a member of the live audience during this show, you can actually ask the questions through me during the actual interview with our guests. Just go to stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com, sign up for free every Thursday morning. You'll get the free invitation with the link, the special super secret link to watch the show live. If you can't watch it live, I realize it's during lunch on a workday. Maybe you have to work, who knows? But if you can't watch it live, you can always catch it on our site, stateofgreaterwesternnewyork.com, or if you are a subscriber to our YouTube channel, or if you like our Facebook page, the show is rebroadcast every Sunday at 1:30. That's all for this week. Again, Fred, thanks. And everybody else, thank you for being here. We'll see you all next week.